Hello everyone. Welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So, before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. Story 1. For years, Reverend Andres Pundi was regarded as a devoted father and a respected missionary within Belgium's Hungarian community. Yet behind his pious facade lurked a horrifying nightmare. Multiple family members vanished without a trace, explained away with vague claims of moving abroad, and a house where fragments of human bones were found dissolved in chemicals. As the truth unraveled, the public recoiled at a sinister secret. This reverend was not only a serial killer, but had manipulated his own daughter into becoming his accomplice. Dubbed Belgium's Bluebeard, the Andres Pundi case remains one of the darkest chapters in modern European crime history. The true extent of his atrocities remains shrouded in mystery, likely due to his cunning ability to conceal his crimes and the negligence of law enforcement. The Pundi case sparked widespread outrage, igniting debates over the police's effectiveness in combating crime and eroding public trust in influential religious figures. It also exposed glaring flaws in the judicial and legal systems, particularly in child protection. On Sunday, October 20, 1996, over 300,000 people marched through the heart of Brussels, Belgium's capital, in a historic demonstration known as the White March. This extraordinary protest, recognized globally, became one of the largest outcries against the government's slow and ineffective response to a series of heinous crimes. Among them was the case of Marc Dutroux, a psychopath charged with kidnapping, abusing, and murdering several young girls in the mid-1990s. Dutroux didn't just become Belgium's most notorious serial offender. His crimes laid bare a cascade of institutional failures, loopholes that enabled him and others like him to perpetrate atrocities unchecked. The failure to thoroughly investigate the victims' disappearances shattered public confidence in state institutions and the justice system. Soon after, independent reports suggested Dutroux may have been linked to a powerful network, possibly even protected by government or police officials. According to disclosed records, Dutroux was arrested on August 13, 1996, plunging Belgium into shock and fury as his crimes came to light. At that time, many Belgians lost all faith in their authorities. The iconic White March not only symbolized public unity, but set a groundbreaking precedent. Law enforcement had to act with greater accountability and urgency, especially in cases involving child abuse. Following the protest, Belgium's parliamentary committee was compelled to reopen investigations into several long-neglected missing persons cases. Around the same period, authorities uncovered a deeply troubling accusation from 1992 lodged by a 33-year-old woman named Agnes Panda. She had approached the police to report that her father had committed depraved acts against her and coerced her half-sister Tai into an incestuous relationship. Agnes also alerted them to the mysterious disappearance of several family members, specifically her stepmother Edith Finder, stepsister Andrea, biological mother Alona Soares, and two brothers, Daniel and Zoltan. It later emerged that Agnes' father was Andres Panda, a prominent reverend in the United Protestant Church, widely respected. within the local church community. Despite the gravity of Agnes' allegations, the police met them with skepticism. They noted her anxious demeanor and inconsistencies in her account. Nonetheless, Andre Panda was summoned for questioning. He denied everything. Records show that in 1986, Andres first reported the disappearance of his second wife, Edith Finter, and their 14-year-old daughter, Andrea. Claiming he discovered Edith's infidelity, prompting her to flee to Germany with her lover and daughter. As for his first wife, Alona Soares, Andres stated she had returned to Hungary with their sons, Daniel and Zoltan. To prove they were alive, he produced photographs he claimed Alona had taken, along with letters and postcards purportedly sent by his ex-wife and children from Israel, the United States, and Brazil. Andres further alleged that Agnes suffered from mental instability, harbored romantic feelings for him, and was jealous of other women in his life. With his articulate demeanor and seemingly authentic evidence, he convinced the police. The next day, Agnes withdrew her complaint and the case was promptly dismissed. One man, however, remained unconvinced. Detective Tomasi, he confided to a colleague his suspicion that Reverend Andres Panda was linked to his family's disappearances. When his superiors learned of this, they ordered him to drop the matter and focus on active cases. This wasn't surprising. Andres was a revered figure in the religious community, while Agnes appeared psychologically unstable. Ironically, around that time, city workers renovating a canal near one of the Pundy family's properties in central Brussels discovered a handful of human bones. At the time, no one connected these remains to the Reverend's missing relatives, and the discovery faded into obscurity. Years later, in a brief interview with a Hungarian newspaper, Detective Tomasi revealed he had continued investigating the case, covertly, defying his superiors' orders. Despite contacting Hungary's Missing Persons Unit, he found no new leads on the Panda family members. In late 1996, after the explosive Mark DRI scandal, Tomasi sensed an opportunity for a broader investigation. He began reviewing old files and after weeks of exhaustive work discovered that Edith Finter, Andre's second wife, still had relatives in Belgium. Before he could contact them, Tomasi was seriously injured in a car accident and hospitalized. Nevertheless, Belgian authorities formally reopened the investigation into Andres Panda. Notably, Agnes, who had accused her father 5 years earlier, was now difficult to locate. She was working in the Graffiti department of the Royal Library of Albert I, a prestigious Belgian institution. After persistent efforts, a senior prosecutor from Brussels Criminal Police contacted her and summoned her for questioning. This time, Agnes held nothing back. She confessed that her family members hadn't disappeared. They were murdered by her and her father, Andres Panda. Her chilling testimony initially met with disbelief from the police, but soon they had to confront the reality of a case as horrifying as Dutre's. Agnes revealed that in August 1986, her father killed his second wife, Edith Finter, and 3 children, Daniel, Zoltan, and Andrea. Worse, Agnes admitted to participating in Daniel's murder and personally killing her biological mother, Alona Soares. While Agnes confessed to being her father's accomplice in most of the killings, one disappearance she claimed no involvement in was that of her sister Tunda, likely occurring in 1990. According to Agnes, 3 victims were shot in the head while the others were bludgeoned with a hammer. Their bodies were dismembered in the basement of one of the Pandey family's homes. The severed parts were placed in a bathtub and dissolved with an industrial drain cleaner akin to acid. The remaining decomposed fragments were taken to a nearby slaughterhouse, minced like animal meat, and discarded in garbage bags with other waste. Agnes recounted living in abject terror during those years alongside her son and 3 siblings. She further disclosed that from age 11 her father coerced her into sexual acts. Trembling, she revealed that not only she but also her half-sister Tamaya endured his abuse, with both becoming pregnant. These revelations were so shocking that police immediately arrested Andres Pandey. That same day, media broadcast images of a 70-year-old reverend being led from his home in handcuffs. Despite his arrest, his face remained eerily calm, devoid of emotion. Belgium was rocked once again by a case involving a serial killer who committed unspeakable crimes against his own children. Andres Pandey was born on June 1, 1927 in Koper, then part of Czechoslovakia. Little is known about his childhood or youth except that he grew up in a Protestant family and studied theology after high school. In a later interview, university classmates described Andres as reserved and aloof, barely engaging in conversation. Yet, he consistently excelled academically. According to some sources, in the mid-1950s, Andres met his first wife, Ilona Sorgs, in 1956 after Hungary's failed revolution against the communist regime. The couple fled to Belgium. Soon after, Andres became a reverend for the Hungarian Protestant community in Brussels and a theology professor at the United Protestant Church. Though not a natural conversationalist, he possessed an extraordinary ability to persuade, profoundly influencing his congregation. This charisma secured generous donations, enabling him to acquire multiple properties in Brussels simultaneously. On January 28, 1958, Andres and Ilona welcomed their first child, Agnes. They later had 2 sons, Daniel in 1961, and Zoltan in 1966. Shortly after Zoltan's birth, the couple faced serious marital issues. Their relationship quickly deteriorated. Unsurprising given Andres's cold, authoritarian demeanor tinged with paranoia and frequent disdain for his family. He micromanaged every aspect of their lives, dictating their thoughts, appearances, and behaviors. By late 1966, Andres divorced Ilona, accusing her of infidelity. She returned to Hungary with their 2 youngest children, leaving Agnes in his care. As previously mentioned, when Agnes was 11, this depraved man began systematically abusing her, forcing her to comply with his desires, brazenly claiming it was to prepare her for adulthood. In truth, Andres Pandey was a predatory deviant. Unsatisfied with tormenting his daughter, he pursued other women through dating ads in Hungarian newspapers. In the early 1970s, he met Edith, a married woman with 3 daughters from prior marriages. Tama, 15, Tund 8, and Andrea 7. Initially, their relationship was clandestine, but by 1979, Edith left her husband and married Andres, her 3rd marriage. They later had 2 children together, a son Andres Jr. and a daughter Ra. Though they appeared harmonious in public, a starkly different reality unfolded behind closed doors. Around 1984, Andres's tyrannical and depraved nature resurfaced. He continued abusing Agnes and eventually targeted Edith's daughter, Tama. By 1986, Tama became pregnant by Andres, triggering a severe family crisis. In a fit of jealousy, Agnes attempted to kill Tama by striking her head with an iron bar. Fortunately, Tama sustained only minor injuries. After her hospital discharge, she reported the incident to the police, but her complaint yielded no results. Some sources suggest Andres incited Agnes' attack, convincing her that Tama's pregnancy threatened their family stability and that eliminating her was necessary. No concrete evidence confirms this, but astonishingly, Agnes was also pregnant at the time. Andres sent her to live with her mother in Hungary to avoid legal repercussions. Despite the ordeal, Tama gave birth. Months later, exhausted by compliance and fearing for her life, she sought refuge with relatives in Vancouver, where she married and later relocated to Hungary. After her harrowing experience, Tamia severed all ties with her former family. Before leaving Canada, she confessed to her mother that her child resulted from prolonged coercion by her stepfather. This revelation sparked fierce arguments between Edith and Andres. Soon after, Edith and her second daughter, Andrea, vanished abruptly. Initially, Andres appeared genuinely concerned, claiming his wife had left without explanation. To friends and acquaintances, he recounted that Edith had run off with another man, even showing them a telegram purportedly signed by her, stating she never wanted to see him again. The truth was far darker. Andres, with Agnes' assistance, who had flown from Hungary specifically for this purpose, had murdered Edith and Andrea. Months later, in 1988, Agnes returned to Brussels with her son to live with her father again. She told relatives that her stepmother and siblings had temporarily moved to France and would later relocate to South America. Her explanations lacked coherence, masking the brutal reality of their murders. In 1990, another disappearance struck this ill-fated family. Andres was living with Agnes, their shared son, and 3 other children, Andres Jr., R.A., and Tunda, who would become his next victim. In later testimony, Agnes recounted that her father once sent the family on a vacation, staying behind alone with Tund. Upon their return, Tund was gone. Andres claimed her strange behavior forced him to expel her from the household. Despite 6 family members vanishing, no significant suspicion arose among those around Andres. His explanations always seemed plausible, bolstered by his respected status as a church representative. Shortly after Andres Panda's arrest in October 1997, police obtained warrants to search his properties, a daunting task as he had acquired numerous apartments and houses. Over the years, he also refused to cooperate with investigators. In mid-October, the first search was conducted at one of his homes. Upon entering, police noticed a wall stained with splotches of red. In the basement, they uncovered human teeth, several kneecaps, other bone fragments, and a canister filled with ashes. These findings were undeniably chilling. Even more terrifying was the forensic conclusion. The remains belonged to 7 women aged 35 to 55 and a young man aged 18 to 23. These discoveries didn't align with Andra's testimony or the descriptions of the Panda family's missing members, raising suspicions of additional previously unknown victims. At this property, police also found weapons, including 3 rifles and 4 handguns, hidden in a secret rooftop compartment. During a search of another house, they discovered more human remains, specifically a left femur and a pelvic fragment. By late October, investigators found large chunks of flesh stored in 2 refrigerators at another of Andre's properties. Weeks later, tests confirmed these were human body parts. Following this shocking revelation, Belgian and Hungarian authorities launched a joint investigation, hypothesizing that Andres Panda could be linked to approximately 60 disappearances over a decade. Police also uncovered that Andres had posted numerous dating ads in Hungarian newspapers using fake names and professions. Through these ads, he lured women with promises of a European-style honeymoon. Typically, he met them in Hungary, where he frequently visited to check on a summer home by the Danube River. Authorities believe the human remains found in his properties likely belonged to some of these women. Over time, Hungarian police identified key witnesses who had contacted Andres through these ads. Just months before the case broke, 2 Hungarian women responded to one of his ads and met him in Brussels. They quickly realized his posted information was fraudulent. Nonetheless, they were forced to stay as he threatened them. From that point, they became temporary slaves, cooking and performing household chores. After a week, Andres proposed marriage, which they rejected, demanding to return to Hungary. Surprisingly, he complied and they safely returned home. Not everyone, however, was as fortunate. Following Andre Panda's arrest, the case garnered immense public attention. European media dubbed him Bluebeard, alluding to Charles Perrault's folk tale, where the protagonist murders his wives and hides their bodies. Around this time, another pastor from Belgium's Hungarian community, who had worked with Andres, spoke on a local TV program. He claimed Andres treated his first wife like a slave and confirmed relationships with at least 20 women who responded to his ads. Soon after, new information complicated the case, revealing Andres' readiness to employ unthinkable tactics to conceal his atrocities. Belgian police received testimonies from parents who met Andres between 1992 and 1996. They said he offered their children roles in a children's film he planned to make about his life. Through this ruse, Andres introduced the auditioning children to acquaintances, claiming they were his own. This convinced others his children were alive when in reality he had killed them long ago. Additionally, Margaret Maguire, one of the last women Andres pursued, testified that during her visit, he introduced 2 young women around 20 as his daughters Andrea and Tund. In truth, both were already deceased. These details underscored Andre's habitual deception to obscure his family's disappearances. In early November 1997, Hungarian police announced sufficient evidence to formally charge Andres Panda. Concurrently, Belgian authorities began questioning the Reverend's true identity, theorizing that the man in custody was his brother and the real Andres had died in Hungary in 1956. This bizarre hypothesis was never thoroughly investigated by either nation. By mid-November, Agnes was also formally charged as an accomplice in her family's murders. Additionally, she was suspected in the 1993 disappearance of a 12-year-old girl whose mother was romantically involved with Andres. On November 26, 1997, a Hungarian newspaper published an article revealing that Andres had previously adopted several Romanian orphans through a charity he founded named Idnap, Panda, spelled backward, Belgian and Hungarian. Authorities suspected he used this organization to raise donations for purchasing Brussels properties. The fate of these adopted children remains unknown, with fears they too were eliminated. In the following months, the investigation continued. In January 1998, DNA analysis of bone fragments from one of Pundi's homes revealed they didn't belong to any family members. By then, evidence linked Andres Pandy and Agnes to at least 14 murders. On February 18, 2002, Andres appeared in a Belgian court charged with murdering his 2 wives, Alona Soares and Edith Finter, and 4 of his 8 children, Daniel, Zoltan, Tund, and Andrea, alongside crimes involving the abuse of minors. Notably, Andres remained silent throughout the trial, speaking only once to deny all charges, claiming his family was alive and protected by a secret organization. The trial's most shocking moment, many agreed, was a forensic video simulating the victims' dissolution using a drain cleaner. The experiment used body parts from a man who died naturally and donated his body to science. Submerged in a vat of the solution, the body disintegrated into a thick brown foam, leaving the courtroom in horrified silence. On March 6, 2002, the Belgian court sentenced Andres Panda to life imprisonment without parole. Prosecutors sought a 29-year sentence for Agnes. However, her defense argued for leniency, citing her lifelong subjugation to her father's absolute control, enduring physical abuse and coercion into heinous acts. They proposed a 21-year sentence for her role as an accomplice in the family murders and the attempted murder of Tama. Andres served his sentence at Leuven prison. In 2007, on his 80th birthday, declining health prompted his transfer to Bruges prison. 6 years later, he sought parole inspired by Marc Dutre's similar attempt, but his request was denied. Andres Panda died in December 2013 of natural causes. Agnes was released in 2010 and has since lived reclusively in a convent, shunning society. Andres Pandy epitomized a narcissistic psychopath obsessed with absolute control. To his congregation, he was a charismatic religious leader. Behind closed doors, he was a desperate, wielding manipulation, deceit, and violence to serve his desires. Though he never confessed, it's likely he committed these crimes to maintain total dominance. Tragically, the true number of his victims remains unknown. Belgian and Hungarian police estimate up to 60 victims. Most remains found in his homes couldn't be identified, and the fate of the Romanian orphans he adopted remains a haunting mystery. Story 2. On April 19, 1999, in Hikari City, Yamaguchi Prefecture, Japan, a brutal murder claimed the lives of a mother and her infant daughter. The perpetrator, a mere 18 years old, acted with chilling cruelty for an utterly irrational motive, showing no remorse. The victim's family fought tirelessly for justice, demanding the harshest penalty, only to face societal backlash. The question of whether a minor committing such a heinous crime deserves the death penalty and whether capital Punishment itself should be abolished ignited fierce debate. When justice and human rights clash, how should society decide? Now, let's revisit the Hikari mother and daughter murder, a case that shocked Japan, to explore the controversies and pain beneath it. At 10 p.m. on April 14, 1999, Hiroshi Majura, a 23-year-old office worker at Nippon Steel, returned home exhausted. After a long day, his family of 3, wife Yao Modimura, and 11-month-old daughter Yuka, lived in an employee dormitory in Hikari City, Yamaguchi Prefecture. Typically, Yao greeted him no matter how late. But that night, Hiroshi sensed something amiss as he approached their door. It was unlocked, the house pitch black and eerily silent. He pushed the door open, softly calling his wife's name, met only by an unsettling stillness. The living room was in disarray, chairs askew, unwashed dishes piled on the kitchen counter. Annoying dread welled up inside him. 2. Check if Yayoi had taken Yuka out. Hiroshi opened the wardrobe to see if her usual shoes and baby carrier were there. As the door creaked open, he noticed the bedding inside stacked oddly, as if concealing something. Peering closer through gaps between the futons, he saw a horrifying sight. Frantic, Hiroshi shoved the bedding aside. Before him lay Yayoi, her limbs and face bound tightly with tape, lifeless. Stunned, he froze, unable to move for what felt like an eternity. Snapping back, he grabbed the phone with trembling hands and called the police. While awaiting their arrival, Hiroshi paced the house, desperately searching for Yuka. He checked every room, but she was nowhere to be found. Police arrived swiftly, launching a thorough search. By morning, they found 11-month-old Yuka inside the house. But the discovery was heartbreaking. She too was dead. Her tiny body wrapped and stuffed into a storage space above the wardrobe was a tragic sight too painful to behold. Just days earlier, Hiroshi and Yayoi had marveled at Yuka's first smile filled with hope for their future. In an instant, that joy was extinguished. Hiroshi and Yayoi met through an arranged introduction. Their romance began as students, deepening over time. After graduating, Hiroshi pursued a master's in engineering at Hiroshima University, while Yayoi worked in her hometown of Fukuoka. Despite the distance, they stayed connected through calls and letters, their bond unshaken. In Hiroshi's final university year, Yayoi discovered she was pregnant. Though joyful, the news posed challenges. With Hiroshi still studying, both families opposed their marriage, questioning their readiness for parenthood. For Hiroshi, the pregnancy was a profound gift. Health issues had led doctors to warn he might never have children, casting a shadow over his life. Learning he would be a father overwhelmed him with emotion, strengthening his resolve to build a happy family with Yayoi. Their persistence won familial support, and they wed in 1997. Yuka arrived in May 1998, named with the hope she'd grow into a kind, radiant person, like a summer sunset warming those around her. After graduating, Hiroshi joined Nippon Steel. Initially, he and Yaya lived apart, each working toward their future. 2 months after Yuka's birth, he brought his wife and daughter to Hikari, settling into the company dormitory. From that moment, their life as a family of 3 truly began. For Hiroshi, days with Yayoi and Yuka were the simplest, happiest of his life. Yet, no one could foresee that this bliss would last a mere 9 months. Their warm, ordinary life was cruelly snatched away in a single night. Who was the killer? Why target a defenseless young woman and an 11-month-old infant? Police formed a task force to investigate. They noted Yao's wallet was missing, but other valuables remained untouched, and the scene showed no signs of ransacking or vandalism, unlike a typical robbery homicide. Though the front door was unlocked at the time of the crime, the lock was intact with no evidence of tampering. Initially, police suspected an acquaintance. However, the Motors, new to Hikari, had few local connections. As recent graduates with clean records, they were unlikely to have enemies. If not an acquaintance, who was the culprit? As the investigation stalled, an elderly neighbor provided a crucial witness statement. She recalled seeing a man in a yellow-green uniform knocking on doors in the dormitory area that afternoon. This detail piqued police interest as it matched the uniform of a local water equipment company in Hikari. Police reviewed the company's records, confirming no employees were assigned to the dormitory that day. They requested a list of employees meeting 2 criteria: access to the uniform and absence from work due to leave, illness, or otherwise on the day of the crime. After screening, police showed photos to dormitory residents for identification. Based on the witnesses' testimony and investigation, they swiftly identified and arrested the suspect on April 18, 4 days after the crime. Shockingly, the perpetrator was an 18-year-old named Takayuki Atsuki, a local resident. He had recently graduated high school and began working at the water equipment company on April 1. Within 10 days, he exhibited troubling behavior. On April 9 and 13, he skipped work, citing health issues, but spent his time playing video games at a friend's house or loitering in arcades overnight. On April 14, still restless, he took another day off. That morning, to avoid suspicion from his family, he wore his work uniform before leaving, then resumed gaming at a friend's. Near noon, he returned home, ate quickly, and wandered out again. That afternoon, long suppressed dark impulses surfaced. Takayuki, in the throes of youthful vigor, had developed an obsession with explicit videos since 9th grade, gradually harboring dangerous desires to act on them. As he matured, these urges intensified, eroding his rationality and moral boundaries, erupting fully that day. He targeted the employee dormitory, knowing most men were at work, leaving women alone. At the nearby Okada apartment complex, he posed as a water pipe inspector, knocking on doors to check bathroom plumbing, seeking a victim. Initially hesitant, fearing his disguise would be exposed, he acted tentatively. But as residents opened their doors without suspicion, he grew confident, believing he could succeed. His boldness surged and he resolved to commit the crime. Around 2:20 p.m., Takayuki rang the bell at Hiroshi's 4th-floor apartment in Building 7. Yao Majura answered. Yuka was with her watching TV in the living room. Takayuki lied, claiming he was inspecting bathroom pipes, planning to feint a check before attacking. Though he and Yayoi were strangers, he had long known of a young, attractive woman in the complex, developing an obsessive, one-sided fixation. How he learned of Yayoi and why he targeted her will be explored later. Seeing Takayuki in a worker's uniform, Yayoi opened the door without suspicion, unwittingly inviting a wolf inside. Seizing her distraction, he grabbed her from behind, forcibly throwing her to the floor. Yao fought back desperately, but her slight frame was no match for the sudden assault. Fearing her resistance would alert neighbors, Takayuki's malevolence deepened. He clamped his hands around her, intent on silencing her permanently. After Yayoi lost consciousness, Takayuki began his depraved act. He then bound her with pre-prepared tape to prevent her revival. Around 3 p.m., Yuka, noticing her mother's stillness, wailed loudly. Only 11 months old, she couldn't calm without comfort. Takayuki, fearing her cries would draw attention, grew increasingly agitated. Unable to soothe her, his anger erupted. He decided to silence her as he had her mother. Grabbing Yuka as she crawled toward Yayoi, he treated her like an inanimate doll, mercilessly, ending her 11-month life with the cord he carried. To delay discovery, Takayuki Itsuki hid Yayoi in the wardrobe and stashed Yuka in the overhead storage compartment. He meticulously wiped down surfaces where fingerprints might linger from his intrusion. To mislead police, he took Yao's wallet containing roughly 300 yen. In cash, about $2.50, and $6,000 yen in vouchers, about $50 to stage a simple theft. He also removed tools used at the scene like cleaning agents, a spray bottle, and pliers, which could bear his prints. These calculated actions reveal not only premeditation but also meticulous care to evade investigation. After the crime, Takayuki Atsuki left the scene nonchalantly. He even used Yao's money to buy arcade tokens and snacks, his callousness chillingly devoid of conscience. How could an 18-year-old commit such acts? Takayuki Atsuki was born on March 16, 1981 in Hikari City, Yamaguchi Prefecture. At the time of the crime, he lived with his father, stepmother, 2 younger brothers and grandmother, a household of 6. His current mother was his stepmother, and 1 brother, born 3 months before the crime, was a half-sibling. Takayuki's father was volatile, cold, and neglectful, frequently violent. He met Takayuki's biological mother through an arranged match. Despite courtship, he coerced her into intimacy before marriage against her will. Takayuki was born into this strained union. Post-marriage, his father's violence escalated, targeting both his wife and young son. Takayuki endured brutal treatment, at times life-threatening. A repairman with meager earnings, his father squandered money on alcohol and gambling. During financial strain, he bullied his wife into borrowing from her family. The household languished in poverty and turmoil with constant marital strife. Takayuki's mother developed severe depression as a result. Before high school, Takayuki was obedient and dutiful. Though terrified of his father, he shielded his mother during assaults, often at great personal risk, sometimes losing consciousness. When his cohabiting grandmother fell ill, he tenderly cared for her, showing warmth and diligence. Despite a grim home life, he retained a flicker of kindness. At 12, a tragedy struck like a tempest, shattering his fragile psyche and marking a turning point in his character. On September 22, 1993, Takayuki returned from school. Stepping inside, he heard his father order him to clean the garage. Hesitating briefly, he complied. Opening the garage door, he was met with a devastating sight. A figure lay rigid and cold, surrounded by scattered excrement and blood, the air thick with despair. It was his beloved mother, lifeless. What crushed Takyuki further was his father's reaction. Unfazed and devoid of grief, he glanced at his wife with icy detachment, as if appraising a broken piece of furniture. "This is because you didn't study properly," he said, blaming Takyuki. Then ordered him to clean up. A chilling dread enveloped Takyuki like an invisible shadow tightening its grip. From that day, his inner world collapsed, and a dark, twisted impulse quietly took root. After his mother's death, his father remarried a Filipina met at a bar, fathering a son in January 1999. To Takayuki, his stepmother and new half-brother brought no warmth to their fractured family. Deepening his sense of alienation, he grew distant, often wandering away from home. Planning to leave Hikari Post High School for work elsewhere, he unexpectedly landed a job at a local water pipe company, forcing him to stay with his family. Takayuki's choice of Yao Matamira as a target likely tied to his father. Both his father and Hiroshi Majuro worked at Nippon Steel, living in the company's dormitory, their homes less than 200 meters apart. Though not close, they had crossed paths. Takayuki's father frequently spoke of Yayoi at home with crude, suggestive remarks, openly praising her attractiveness and expressing desire. Shockingly, he discussed such matters in front of his underage son. These lewd comments fueled Takayuki's fixation on Yayoi. He secretly observed her life, nurturing a powerful urge to violate her. This unchecked desire culminated in the horrific tragedy. After his son's crime, Takayuki's father faced media and public scrutiny. Far from remorse or apology, he offered none, coldly stating, "It's not my concern. My son committed the crime, shirking responsibility." His words exposed not only his failure as a father, but also a deeply rooted moral distortion. Though police arrested Takayuki 4 days after the crime, his capture didn't end the ordeal. Instead, it launched a 20-year legal battle. On May 8, 1999, the Yamaguchi District Prosecutor's Office, deeming Takayuki criminally liable, referred him to the Yamaguchi Family Court. Under Japan's juvenile law, offenders aged 18 to under 20 facing serious crimes like murder, life imprisonment, or fixed-term sentences first undergo juvenile hearings in family court. If deemed unfit for juvenile proceedings, the case transfers to district court for formal criminal prosecution. Juvenile hearings are closed, barring victims' families from attending or tracking progress. For Hiroshi Madara, this meant an agonizing voiceless wait. Having lost his wife and daughter, he couldn't access the full truth or voice opinions, forced to cooperate with police inquiries and face media questions. In those relentless, grief-stricken days, waiting was his only recourse. After 4 weeks, the court ruled Takayuki's crimes exceptionally heinous, warranting adult prosecution due to their severity, potentially death or life imprisonment. The case then entered public criminal proceedings. On August 11, 1999, the preliminary trial began. For the victim's family, reality remained harsh. They received only 3 reserved seats, competing with the public for remaining spots via lottery. Worse, they were stripped of any right to speak, express opinions, or question proceedings. This arrangement left them feeling the law's cold detachment. During the fourth preliminary hearing in November 1999, Hiroshi brought photos of Yayoi and Yuka to court, but was stopped by the judge, who argued the images might affect the defendant's emotions. After debate, the judge reluctantly allowed them, but only covered in black cloth. That victims' families faced restrictions to spare the perpetrators' feelings while enduring the loss of loved ones was for Hiroshi like salt in an open wound. He couldn't fathom why a criminal of such magnitude deserved emotional protection while grieving relatives were forced to suppress their pain, listened silently, and were denied even a shred of dignity for their loved ones. At trial, Takayuki appeared in slippers. Prompted by his lawyer, he bowed to the victim's family, offering a brief, "I'm truly sorry. I did something unforgivable." During questioning, he admitted all charges, maintaining consistent statements to feign remorse. Hiroshi expressed skepticism, accusing Takayuki of performing for the court his remorse a facade. He deemed the crimes unforgivable. The prosecution unwavering demanded the death penalty. Rare request for a juvenile reserved for exceptionally grave cases. Takayuki's defense argued the crime wasn't premeditated but impulsive. Raised in an unhappy, emotionally unstable family, his psychological development was immature. Citing juvenile law principles barring death penalties for those under 18, they sought leniency. On March 22, 2000, the Yamaguchi District Court sentenced Takayuki to life imprisonment. The ruling acknowledged the crime's severity left no room for leniency, but noted his youth and apparent remorse suggested potential for rehabilitation, sparing him death. For the victim's family, this was unacceptable. In Japan's justice system, then life imprisonment didn't mean lifelong confinement. Good behavior could lead to parole in 7 to 8 years, especially under juvenile protections. This disparity left the family feeling the justice system's impotence and imbalance. At the press conference following the verdict, Hiroshi Majura, choked with emotion, voiced his outrage and helplessness. Despairing of the legal system, he declared he no longer wished to appeal, only to personally end the perpetrator's life. This statement sparked widespread societal debate. Some deemed his words extreme, questioning whether the culprit deserved no chance at redemption, making Hiroshi a target of public criticism and immense pressure from misunderstanding. Beyond Hiroshi, another figure vehemently opposed the verdict, prosecutor Yoshida, who handled the case. After the press conference, Hiroshi visited Yoshida's office. Furious, Yoshida said, "I have a young daughter, too, so I can't fathom someone cruelly targeting a toddler crawling toward her mother. If the law doesn't harshly punish such monsters, what's its purpose? I reject this ruling entirely. Even if I fail 100 times, I'll try 101. Hiroshi, let's fight together to reform justice." These words pierce Hiroshi's despair, igniting a spark of hope. Determined that his wife and daughter's lives not be lost in vain, he embraced this mission. Plunging into a battle for judicial reform, not only to ensure the perpetrator faced the law's severest penalty, but also to secure the rights and voice victims' families deserved. Alongside other victims' relatives, lawyers, and supporters, Hiroshi founded a nationwide organization called Tomorrow's Association. Tomorrow's association aimed to unite voices, advocating for victims' families long silenced, fighting for their rightful dignity and entitlements. Their key demands included: first, the absence of basic victims' and families' rights. Hiroshi highlighted that current criminal procedure laws omitted any mention of victims' rights, not even the word right, emphasizing a system biased toward protecting perpetrators while neglecting victims and their kin. Second, the state's monopoly on punitive authority. The justice system, with the state in a dominant position judging a weaker defendant, provided defendants numerous protections yet stripped victims' families of even basic opportunities to speak or present in court. Third, the ban on bringing victims' photos to court. To convey his loss, Hiroshi tried displaying Yayoi and Yuka's photos but was barred, underscoring victims' families' marginalized status. These demands swiftly drew a response from then Prime Minister Obuchi Kweso, who acknowledged the law's inadequacy in aiding and protecting innocent victims, urging politicians to heed Hiroshi's plight. This stance garnered broad societal support. Though Obuchi suffered a stroke and died on May 14, 2002, days prior, Japan's National Diet passed 3 landmark reforms: the Crime Victims Protection Act, the Criminal Procedure Amendment Act, and the Prosectoral Review Amendment Act. These allowed victims and families to attend trials and voice opinions, no longer confined to silent observation. For the first time, Japan's justice system formally incorporated victims' perspectives, a milestone in victims' rights history. Buoyed by public support, the prosecution appealed to the Hiroshima High Court on March 28, 2000, demanding the death penalty for Takayuki Atsuki. During the appeal, the prosecution unveiled new evidence. On April 26, 2001, they presented letters Takayuki sent to friends from prison post-life sentence, deemed critical by the court. These letters revealed his lack of genuine remorse. Self-proclaimed spokesman of God, judges, police, lawyers, prosecutors. No one has the right to judge me. Those two can't come back anyway. I'm curious how the court will play out. With good behavior, I'll be out in 7 to 8 years max. Either way, I'm intrigued by prison life and in no rush to leave. A friend, moved by Hiroshi's televised anguish, handed the letter to the prosecution, feeling compelled to aid him. The letter exposed Takayuki's feigned courtroom apology as a ploy for leniency, as Hiroshi had suspected. Takayuki claimed the letter was careless, meant to cheer worried friends, not expecting its public disclosure. His defense argued the prosecution's use violated Article 44 of the Constitution on male privacy, deeming it unconstitutional. The court rejected this. On September 7, 2001, the Hiroshima High Court began reviewing the appeal. The prosecution argued Takayuki's motive was despicable, his methods extraordinarily cruel, and his lack of genuine remorse or apology undermined the initial rulings. Rehabilitation assessment. They reiterated the death penalty demand. On March 14, 2002, the Hiroshima High Court upheld the life sentence, rejecting the prosecution's appeal. Unconvinced, the prosecution and Hiroshi appealed further. Over time, the court held 12 hearings on the death penalty question. Rather than detailing each, key points are highlighted. Compared to Hiroshi, Takayuki received superior legal support. Japanese law provides state-appointed funded defense counsel, but Takayuki's team comprised volunteer private attorneys. By March 27, 2002, when the case reached the Supreme Court, this defense team of the century grew from 2 to 21 members, including prominent anti-death penalty advocates like Yuta Yoshio and Adaka Shuiki, earning media acclaim. On June 20, 2006, the Supreme Court overturned the Hiroshima High Court's ruling, remanding the case for retrial. On May 24, 2007, the Hiroshima High Court began the retrial's first hearing. Sensing an unfavorable tide, all 21 defense attorneys attended, altering Takayuki's testimony and presenting new arguments. Takayuki, deprived of maternal love, clung to Yayoi unintentionally, causing her death, not deliberately. Some claimed he influenced by the manga Makai Tenzo demonic reincarnation believed his actions could revive her. Yuka's death was an accident from excessive force to quiet her crying. Takayuki aligned with these claims, amending his initial testimony, stating he hid the victims in the wardrobe, believing Dorian would resolve everything. These absurd, far-fetched defenses sparked outrage in and beyond the courtroom, fueling societal discontent. The defense was criticized for disregarding victims' families' feelings, fabricating excuses to evade the death penalty, and faced intense backlash. Japanese citizens launched a petition demanding strict punishment for the defense team of the century, deepening public disdain for anti-death penalty advocates. After prolonged hearings and disputes, the case concluded on April 22, 2008. On April 22, 2008, Judge Narakazu Yasuide of the Hiroshima High Court sentenced Takayuki Itsuki to death. Narakazu noted Takayuki's 6.5-year denial of charges with new defenses emerging late, deeming them anomalous and rejecting them. On rehabilitation, he criticized Takayuki's false excuses, indicating diminished reform potential. The defense's staunch anti-death penalty stance worsened Takayuki's courtroom impression. The defense immediately appealed to the Supreme Court for a reduced sentence. But it was rejected on February 20, 2012, finalizing Takayuki's death sentence. At the press conference post-sentencing, Hiroshi's face showed no triumph. Calm yet heavy, his voice carried a somber grief. He added that this wasn't an end, but a phase. Though the trial closed, he'd carry the case's burden lifelong. Despite the verdict, Takayuki's defense persisted. On October 29, 2012, they filed for retrial with new forensic and psychological reports. But the Hiroshima High Court rejected it in October 2015 for lacking novelty. Similar appeals were dismissed by the Supreme Court in 2019 and 2020. In late 2020, the defense submitted fresh retrial requests, arguing Takayuki's childhood mistreatment by his father caused brain damage, impairing his criminal responsibility. These two were rejected. The defense continues filing appeals. Due to retrial requests and appeals, the death sentence remains unexecuted. Some suspect the defense, foreseeing an unchangeable outcome, files motions to delay execution. This high-profile case not only sparked heated debates on juvenile law and the death penalty, but also catalyzed judicial reforms for victims' families. Journalist Kota Takashi chronicled Hiroshi's multi-year emotional journey in struggling with despair. Hiroshi Madi Mura's 3,300 Days. Adapted into a two-part TV drama aired in September 2010 with Achi Yozaki as Kota and Mishima Hidekazu as Hiroshi. It won the Grand Prize for TV Drama at Japan's Agency for Cultural Affairs Arts Festival. In 2009, Hiroshi remarried a woman 7 years his senior, now living a simple, peaceful life. Once teetering on despair's edge after losing his loved ones, he endured grueling trials, public scrutiny, and inner torment. Post-storm, he rebuilt a family with a partner who understands his pain and resilience moving forward. His life bears past scars, yet he seeks peace and redemption in the ordinary. This tragedy's final chapter remains unwritten, but Hiroshi's steadfastness and compassion reveal the power of facing pain without abandoning justice or hope. As for Takayuki Atsuki, his turbulent upbringing, steeped in isolation and violence, likely sowed seeds for his later deviance. Yet, this past cannot justify his brutal theft of two innocent lives. As Hiroshi said during the initial life sentence, precisely because of this, the perpetrator must understand the immense value of the lives he took. Story 3. At 4 a.m. on December 17, 1968, Barbara, a 20-year-old college student, cracked open her motel room door. In an instant, two men dressed as police officers stormed inside. They sprayed chloroform, a potent anesthetic, rendering her mother unconscious. The intruders swiftly overpowered Barbara, dragging her outside and shoving her into a waiting car. The vehicle sped off into the night, disappearing into the eerie depths of a dense forest. There, Barbara was confined in a suffocating wooden box, no larger than a coffin. These strangers buried her alive, forcing Barbara to confront a breathless terror. Meanwhile, her desperate family launched a frantic search as the kidnappers relentlessly pressured them, demanding an enormous ransom. Trapped in the claustrophobic box, Barbara felt the air grow thinner, each passing second slicing into a dwindling hope of survival. This harrowing ordeal would later be chronicled in the book 83 Hours Till Dawn, a gripping account of a hostage rescue that shocked the nation. This story unfolds in 1968 during the height of the Hong Kong flu pandemic. From the summer of 1968 to the spring of 1970, this global outbreak claimed roughly 4 million lives. By December of that year, the disease had swept into the United States, reaching Georgia in the university campus where Barbara Mell was studying. Barbara, then 20, was an economics major. On December 14, during a grueling exam, she began experiencing the debilitating symptoms of the Hong Kong flu and was forced to leave the testing room. Her throat burned so fiercely she could barely speak, and her head throbbed as if hammered with each pulse. Exhausted, Barbara longed to return home to recover. Her weakened state led her to self-isolate, a decision that unwittingly made her the perfect target for a horrifying kidnapping. That same day, Barbara called her mother, Jane, her voice barely a whisper as she explained she'd received no medical care. Overwhelmed healthcare workers and unreachable hospitals left her stranded. Upon hearing this, Jane immediately drove from Florida to Atlanta to retrieve her daughter, a journey of roughly 9 hours. After leaving the university campus, Barbara and her mother checked into a room at the roadway in a few miles away in Dakar to rest and recuperate. The Mackles were a well-to-do family, and Jane spared no expense, renting a room with 2 beds and a color television. She informed the Front desk. They would stay indefinitely until Barbara fully recovered. After 3 days of rest, Barbara's health began to improve. By Tuesday, December the 17th, she invited her boyfriend Stuart to visit. They ate, talked, and spent time together in the room. During their conversation, Barbara confided in Stuart about an unsettling feeling, a sense that someone was watching her. She couldn't pinpoint the source or identify who it might be, but the invisible gaze sent chills down her spine. Stuart, trying to reassure her, suggested she might still be feverish, prone to mild hallucinations. He left later that evening as planned. That night, Barbara and Jane chatted in bed before turning in. They made plans to return to Florida as soon as Barbara was nearly recovered and the university had closed for the Christmas break. Exhausted, Barbara drifted into sleep, unaware that in just a few hours she would face the most terrifying moments of her life. At 4 a.m., Barbara jolted awake to urgent knocking at the door. In 1968, motels liked the roadway and were not entirely secure. Their outward-facing doors left rooms vulnerable to anyone passing by. The knocking persisted, followed by a voice. "Ma'am, I need to speak with Barbara Mack. It's about her boyfriend. The one driving the white Ford. He's been in an accident and is in the hospital. He asked us to bring her to him." Barbara and Jane leapt from bed. Peering through the peepholy, they saw a man in a police hat accompanied by a shorter figure. Barbara hesitated, her mind racing. It's 4 in the morning. Why would Stuart be in an accident? He's never out this late. Doubt nodded at her, but Jane urged her to open the door and find out what was happening. Reluctantly, Barbara unlocked the door. In a flash, the two men barreled inside, slamming the door behind them. The taller one brandished a gun, cornering the mother and daughter against the wall. The shorter man approached Jane, clutching a bottle of anesthetic and a cloth. Jane screamed, pleading with the intruders to spare them, offering money, the car, jewelry, anything to ensure their safety, but her cries fell on deaf ears. The chloroform-soaked cloth was pressed against her face, and within seconds, Jane collapsed unconscious. Now, alone, Barbara begged the kidnappers not to use the chloroform on her. Surprisingly, her pleas seemed to work. And the men refrained for the moment. As they restrained her, Barbara's mind reeled. Why her? Why target her in the dead of night at a remote motel indicator? The questions swirled unanswered. She was marched out of the room at gunpoint. The barrel pressed into her back. They forced her into a waiting car outside. Barbara sat frozen. Her mind blank, too terrified to resist. An hour and a half later, around 5:30 a.m., the night shift clerk at the motel snapped awake to the blaring sound of a car horn echoing from the parking lot. The relentless noise pierced the early morning silence. Irritated, the clerk rushed outside, shouting for the noise to stop before it woke the entire area, but he froze at the sight before him. A woman bound tightly inside a car, frantically slamming her head against the steering wheel to sound the horn. It was Jane, Barbara's mother. Somehow, Jane had regained consciousness. Defying her restraints, she stumbled from the room to her car. In a desperate bid for attention, she used her head to trigger the horn, sending out a piercing alarm into the night. The motel clerk frantically untied Jane. The moment she was free, Jane screamed in desperation, "They've taken my daughter. Please call the police. Hurry, get me a phone." That same morning, Robert, Barbara's father, was jolted awake by the piercing ring of the telephone. On the line, local Georgia police delivered devastating news. His daughter had been kidnapped. His wife Jane had been sedated but miraculously was unharmed. Robert sprang into action, leveraging every connection at his disposal. He demanded that local police coordinate with the FBI, certain a ransom demand would soon follow. Simultaneously, he arranged a private jet to fly to Georgia within hours. In no time, 105 FBI agents were mobilized, pouring every resource into the kidnapping case. Meanwhile, Barbara, ripped from her motel room in the dead of night, found herself stranded in a desolate forest, far from any sign of life. Her captors led her to a shallow pit where a wooden box just large enough for a single person awaited. A chilling replica of a coffin. Barbara, gripped by panic, pleaded hysterically, "I'll behave, I swear. I won't scream. I won't do anything. Just please don't bury me." "Alive," she repeated, her voice breaking with despair. But one of the men responded with icy detachment. "Calm down. We're not burying you alive. You'll stay here until your parents pay the ransom. Make a scene and I'll use the chloroform. And trust me, waking up in there will be far worse." Her fear was uncontainable. And Barbara continued begging not to be locked in the box. Finally, one of the kidnappers lost patience. He pressed the chloroform-soaked cloth to her face. As she slipped into unconsciousness, Barbara was forced into the coffin, barely aware of the nightmare unfolding. In her dazed state, the kidnappers handed her a sign reading "Kidnapper" and "Kidnapped Victim" and snapped a photograph. Proof that Barbara Mack was still alive. The image along with a ransom demand was sent to her family. Once the photo was taken, the box was sealed shut. The kidnappers began shoveling dirt over it. Barbara was officially buried alive. Her fate now hinging on whether her family would meet the ransom demands. Barbara later recounted, "When I came to inside that box, I started screaming, pounding my hands and feet against the walls, trying to break free. I thought I'd lost my mind, gone insane in there. It couldn't be real. I begged God not to abandon me. Then I started talking to myself just to stay sane." In near total darkness, Barbara could barely see. From above, her captor spoke through a PVC pipe connected to the box, attempting to reassure her. They told her the box contained food, water, a small blanket, and a flashlight. If it rained, a pump would prevent flooding, ensuring she wouldn't suffocate. In a cruel irony, the kidnappers had meticulously prepared the box to make Barbara feel comfortable in her temporary tomb. They even included a box of sanitary pads and a note, claiming that if her family didn't pay the ransom within 7 days, she would still be released. As the harrowing hours dragged on, Barbara was left alone in the depths of her underground prison. Back at the ML family home, the telephone rang. Answering it was Odo Ad, a close family friend, as Robert had already flown to Georgia, where his daughter was taken. On the other end, a kidnapper's voice cut through, cold and deliberate. "Dig in the yard under the palm tree. You'll find what you need. Then the line went dead. Odo Ad rushed to the Mackle's yard, zeroing in on the palm tree mentioned. Beneath a stone, he found a glass bottle containing a 3-page ransom letter. Its contents were bone-chilling. Barbara is buried in a box. She's alive, but she'll suffocate if you don't pay $500,000. She has enough supplies to survive for 7 days, no more. The money must be in used $20 bills, unmarked, untraceable, and bundled in stacks of $1,000. 500 stacks in total. When Robert M.L. has the money ready, he must place an ad in the classified section of the Miami Herald, reading, "Darling, please come home. We will pay all expenses no matter the time. Your family is here." Once the ad is published, the phone will ring again with instructions for the exchange. At this point, you might be wondering, who was Barbara M.L.E. and why was her family targeted with such an astronomical ransom? In 1968, $500,000 was equivalent to roughly $4 million today. To understand why, let's delve deeper into Barbara and her family's story. Barbara Jane M.L.E. was born on October 19, 1948, the daughter of Robert and Jane Mell, residents of Florida. Barbara was born into privilege as her father Robert Mell along with his brothers owned one of America's largest real estate conglomerates. Founded by Robert's father in 1908, the company pioneered planned residential communities. They would buy land, build 35 homes, sell them all, and reap massive profits. Today, this model is commonplace, but back then, it was revolutionary. As a result, the M.L. family amassed a fortune worth approximately $20 million in today's dollars. Despite their wealth, the Mackles were known for their humility. Friends described them as unpretentious, never flaunting their fortune with extravagant clothing or lavish lifestyles. Barbara embodied this ethos. She was hard-working and ambitious. Having attended elite private girls' schools where she earned numerous academic awards. She graduated high school as valedictorian, achieving the highest score in her final exams. Yet like her parents, Barbara remained grounded. She was friendly and inclusive, connecting with people regardless of their background, public or private school, blue collar or white collar. To Barbara, who you were mattered more than where you came from. At the time of her kidnapping, Barbara was dating Stuart Woodward. The couple had plans to move in while completing their studies, but a horrific event shattered those dreams. The M.L. family's vast wealth made them an ideal target for kidnappers, and Barbara, their beloved daughter, was any parent's greatest vulnerability. Events unfolded as expected. Despite the FBI's urging not to pay the ransom, Robert resolved to withdraw $500,000 from his bank account and placed the classified ad as instructed. To him, no risk was worth taking when his daughter was buried alive. Federal agents tried to reassure him. "Don't worry, sir. We'll find your daughter. The ransom note says she has enough supplies for 7 days. Give us at least 7 days to track her down." But Robert couldn't wait. The thought of Barbara enduring another second in that hellish confinement was unbearable. To prove Barbara was still alive, the kidnappers sent the photograph of her in the box holding the sign. The money was withdrawn. Stacks of $20 bills neatly packed into a bag, awaiting the publication of the ad. On December 19, 2 days after the kidnapping, Robert received a call instructing him to head immediately to Biscayne Bay, Florida. Without hesitation, he boarded his private jet, racing back from Georgia to Florida. Over the phone, the kidnappers directed him to a sand mound at Biscayne Bay, where a blinking box would mark the spot to leave the ransom. Robert wasted no time, landing in Florida. After a 90-minute flight, he drove to Biscayne Bay, scouring the area for the mound and the flashing box, but there was nothing. He stood there seething, clutching a bag stuffed with $500,000, unsure of what to do next. Meanwhile, underground, Barbara remained trapped in a box that reeked of decay. Despite the ventilation system, the stench of sweat, urine, tears, and fluctuating temperatures drove her to the brink of despair. She heard nothing but her own anguished cries. No visitors, no responses. Never had she felt so utterly alone. In his confusion, Robert drove to a small wooded area near a bridge in Biscayne Bay, a location mentioned in the kidnapper's call. There, he quietly placed the bag containing $500,000, clinging to a fragile hope that the kidnappers would find it. Then he left. As he drove away, he collapsed in anguish, convinced he had botched everything. He feared the kidnappers wouldn't locate the money and that Barbara wouldn't survive the box. But then something unthinkable happened. As Robert drove off, a woman living near Biscayne Bay heard the hum of a motorboat's engine. It was still dark and Robert had taken every precaution to act discreetly. At the time, the area around Biscayne Bay had been plagued by a string of burglaries. Hearing a boat at night, the woman feared thieves were approaching from the water and immediately dialed 911. Miami police descended on the scene, the very area where the woman reported the suspicious sound. It was 5 a.m. Upon arrival, officers spotted two men sprinting near the wooded area. Their movements weren't those of early morning joggers. They were fleeing, clutching a bag. The police shouted for them to stop and gave chase. But in the darkness, visibility was poor, complicating the pursuit. After a search, officers discovered an abandoned Volvo near the woods. Inside was a bag brimming with so much cash it left them stunned. Clearly, the kidnappers, panicked by the sudden police presence, had fled without the money. Ironically, the Miami police summoned over a suspected burglary were unaware of the ransom exchange. Faced with a fortune and no clear protocol, they contacted the FBI. When Robert learned the ransom drop had failed, that the kidnappers had been spooked by the Miami police, he was on the verge of breaking. He begged the FBI to act. Return the money. Contact the kidnappers, explain it was a misunderstanding. He hadn't set a trap. Nearly 3 days had passed, and Barbara was still entombed in that horrific box. Robert knew she couldn't endure much longer. He insisted at any cost. She had to be saved. The FBI agreed to issue a public statement in Robert M.'s name, clarifying he had no involvement in the Miami police's intervention. He stressed he hadn't requested it, was ready to pay, and urged the kidnappers to reach out again. At 10 p.m. on December 19, the ML family's phone rang with instructions for a new drop-off location. Robert didn't hesitate. He rushed to the site, left the money as directed, and this time the exchange went smoothly. No police interference, but then silence. No calls followed. That night, Jane and Robert waited anxiously, hoping for word of their daughter's whereabouts. The night dragged on, dawn broke, and still no response. The ML family began to sink into despair. Meanwhile, the FBI had launched a manhunt to identify the kidnappers. In the abandoned Volvo, they found a passport belonging to Ruth Eisenshire and 2 plane tickets to Las Vegas, one in her name, the other for Gary Christ. Inside the car were photos of Barbara holding the kidnapped sign. The hunt was on with hopes of apprehending the criminals before Barbara succumbed underground. At first glance, it seemed straightforward. The FBI had the suspects' identities, but the problem was the kidnappers had succeeded in the second ransom drop, pocketing $500,000. With that sum, they could vanish in an instant. Yet, the FBI took some comfort in reviewing Ruth and Gary's profiles. These weren't hardened professional killers. Neither had taken a life, at least not yet. Gary Christ was born on April 29, 1945 in Alaska. Raised in a family of salmon and shrimp fishermen, from a young age, Gary earned a reputation as at 14, he was caught stealing a car and sent to a juvenile reformatory. After a year, he returned to his parents in Alaska, attempting to finish school and graduating high school in 1963. Fed up with Alaska's brutal winters, Gary moved to California, seeking new opportunities. At 18, he married Carmen. Then 17. Soon after, they welcomed their first child. But for Gary, a quiet life with a modest paycheck was unbearable. Like many criminals, normally gnawed at him. He returned to crime, starting with car theft and predictably was caught. After a few months behind bars, Gary secured conditional parole, vowing to reform. But his promises were empty. Instead of turning his life around, he chose to escape. On November 11, 1968, Gary and a fellow inmate began plotting a prison break. For weeks, they secretly sawed through their cell windows bars, replacing them with makeshift materials. To fool the guards, they stuffed their beds to mimic sleeping figures during checks. Then Gary and his cellmate slipped through the window, crept across the prison yard, and scaled the fence. But alarms blared. Floodlights snapped on, pinning them in their glow. Guards shouted for them to stop. Once, twice, 3 times. Shots rang out. Gary pressed on while his accomplice was hit and fell from the fence meters above the ground. And then Gary miraculously cleared the fence, vanishing into the night. After the escape, he sought out his wife and young son. The family fled to Boston, where Gary adopted the alias George Deacon, claiming to be 28. Growing a beard, and landing a job as a lab technician, a skill he'd picked up in prison, but as always, a stable, monotonous life bored Gary. Despite Carmen giving birth to their second child, he grew restless with the repetitive grind of family life. In September 1968, Gary signed on as a sailor for a 2-week voyage. It was on this trip that he met Ruth Eisman, a 26-year-old student who would later become his accomplice in Barbara's kidnapping. Ruth was the one who disguised herself as the shorter man during the motel break-in, concealing her identity. Born in November 1942 in Honduras, Ruth grew up in an intellectual family. Her father a scientist, her mother a doctor. No one could have imagined a woman like her would be involved in burying a 20-year-old alive for ransom. When she came to the US to study, Ruth was fluent in Spanish, French, German, and English, taking on odd jobs to support herself. Ruth and Gary met aboard that fateful ship. Sparks flew, and they quickly began a romance. Upon returning home, Gary bluntly told Carmen he no longer loved her and ordered her to leave with their 2 children. Heartbroken, Carmen complied. In hindsight, it was likely for the best, as Gary's next actions would prove that escaping him was the choice. With Carmen gone, Ruth moved in with Gary. He began planting a reckless idea in her mind. Kidnapping a wealthy person and extorting their family for ransom could change their lives overnight. Once their identities were uncovered, Ruth Eisenmaner and Gary Christ were placed on the FBI's most wanted list, ranking among the top 10 fugitives. Ruth made history as the first woman ever to appear on this list. At 3 p.m. on a late December day in 1968, the FBI received an anonymous call from a man with a chilling tone. Listen carefully. I'll only say this once. He revealed that Barbara was buried in a dense forest near Berkeley Lake, Georgia, just south of Atlanta. The FBI immediately dispatched 8 vehicles carrying agents to the reported area to search for the missing woman. But in 1968, the forest was vast, and without modern technology, the search posed a daunting challenge. Officers teeked through the thick underbrush, scanning for any sign of Barbara. Hours ticked by, each one heavier than the last. If she was there, surely she'd make some noise. A knock against the box, a faint cry for help. Yet, after relentless searching, despair began to creep into the team. Some feared she may have already suffocated. Just as hope was fading, a sudden sound broke the silence, thunk like someone striking wood beneath the earth. The team froze. An agent called out, "Barbara, if that's you, knock again." Immediately, more knocks echoed clearer and closer this time. Following the sound, agent spotted a PVC pipe protruding from the ground. Barbara was right there, mere inches below the surface. The team dug frantically, hands and shovels moving in unison. After exactly 12 minutes, the soil was cleared and the box's lid was pried open, revealing Barbara inside. Drenched in humidity and sweat, the young woman sobbed uncontrollably, her voice trembling as she begged to be pulled out. Too weak to stand, she was carried from the forest by the agents. Her first words, gasped in a frail whisper, were, "My parents, are they okay?" After 83 hours buried alive, Barbara Mell was finally free. She was rushed to a hospital for treatment and recovery. Doctors noted she had lost 22 lbs in just 3 days and was severely dehydrated. Yet, astonishingly, her mental resilience shone through. She was overjoyed to be alive. During her captivity, Barbara revealed she hadn't dared drink the water in the box, fearing the kidnappers had laced it with sedative. While Barbara's rescue dominated headlines, Gary and Ruth remained at large. With $500,000 in hand, the pair spent recklessly. Gary boldly traveled to Palm Beach, not far from Miami, where the kidnapping had sparked a national frenzy, to buy a $2,300 boat, paying in cash. A stranger flashing that much money raised immediate suspicion, and the seller promptly alerted authorities. A breathless chase ensued on the water. Gary daringly navigated the boat through Palm Beach's intricate waterways, aiming for the open ocean, but the FBI was quick to respond. They ordered him to stop, but Gary ignored them, flooring the throttle as the boat tore across the waves. He skillfully evaded the FBI's pursuit, vanishing into the vast ocean. The manhunt escalated to its highest level. Furious and humiliated by losing their suspect, the FBI deployed helicopters to scour Florida, alerted all patrol units, and issued an urgent bulletin. Anyone spotting Gary or his boat must report it immediately. On December 21, a helicopter spotted Gary on Hog Island, a small overgrown island in inland Florida. Realizing he'd been found, he abandoned the boat and fled into the dense forest. Police unleashed tracking dogs, but the swampy terrain slowed their progress. The hunt stretched into a grueling 12-hour ordeal on Hog Island. Finally, exhausted and hopeless, Gary stumbled out from a thicket, hands raised in surrender, muttering weakly, "I'm done. Can I have some water?" Though Gary was in custody, he insisted Ruth wasn't with him. True enough, the FBI found no trace of her since the second ransom drop. It wasn't until 3 months later, on March 5, 1969, that a new lead emerged. After splitting the ransom, Ruth had fled to Oklahoma, where she met an 18-year-old named John Ray. Ruth told John she was escaping an abusive family and needed help starting over. Trusting her, the young man assisted her in finding a place to stay and a job. Ruth was hired as a nurse at a local hospital. But when her employer requested fingerprints for a background check, her cover unraveled. As expected, the fingerprints matched those of a wanted fugitive. Ruth too was apprehended. In Georgia, kidnapping for ransom carried the possibility of a death sentence. Both Gary Christ and Ruth Eisenherr faced a trial that would determine their fate. During her defense, Ruth claimed her love for Gary had clouded her judgment. She only wanted to follow him into a life of luxury and insisted she never harmed Barbara. Ultimately, she was sentenced to 7 years in prison for kidnapping. After serving her term, Ruth was deported to her native Honduras, permanently banned from returning to the United States. Gary, by contrast, showed no remorse. He strutted defiantly in court, offering a flimsy defense and even attempting to plead insanity. The prosecutor, unyielding, demanded the death penalty by electric chair, arguing that such a punishment must be used to its fullest extent. Most jurors agreed with the death sentence, but staunchly opposed it, sparing Gary and securing him a life sentence instead. During the trial, Barbara unexpectedly stood and thanked Gary for alerting the FBI after receiving the ransom, for not killing her, and for leaving food and water in the box. As the life sentence was announced, Gary showed no reaction, silently exiting the courtroom. Yet in prison, he continued to draw attention. In 1969, he filed a complaint about the size of his cell. Due to his prior escape, he was confined to a maximum security unit, a windowless solitary cell, completely isolated. At Christmas 1969, Gary Christ and Ruth Eisenherr sent Barbara a holiday card, wishing her a joyful season and apologizing for the kidnapping. While incarcerated, Gary wrote an autobiography, predictably centering on the Barbara Mell case. He smuggled the manuscript out and the book, titled Life, was published. After serving 10 years of his life sentence, Gary was astonishingly granted conditional parole. The court reviewed the case and noted that Barbara had not been physically assaulted or abused during her captivity, deeming the crime cleanly executed. Undeterred, Gary went further, petitioning for a full pardon to pursue his dream of studying medicine. Shockingly, this request was granted. Despite the Mell family's outrage, Gary later graduated from medical school and worked at a hospital for 4 years, until he was fired for inappropriate comments to patients. Unfazed, he pivoted to chartering a yacht, slipping into Colombia to smuggle cocaine. But the FBI, ever vigilant, caught him with 37 pounds of cocaine and 4 undocumented immigrants aboard who had paid Gary to be smuggled into the U.S. On January 19, 2007, Gary was convicted of drug trafficking, sentenced to 5 years, and released early in November 2010 for good behavior. Today, Ruth and Gary are still alive, but no longer in contact, each leading separate lives after their years behind bars. As for Barbara, she collaborated with journalist Gene Miller to write 83 Hours Till Dawn, a detailed account of the nightmare she endured. She described the book as her way of closing that chapter, never to revisit it. In it, Barbara vividly recounts the dampness, the paralyzing fear, and the sheer horror of being buried alive. After her rescue, she took months before returning to school to complete her degree, determined to rebuild her life. In April 1971, Barbara married Stuart Woodward, her boyfriend at the time. They had 4 children together. Stuart has since passed away, but Barbara, now 77, is still alive, living quietly after surviving the harrowing ordeal of her youth. And so today's case comes to a close. Story 4. On August 18, 2012, 53-year-old Nancy Howard was driving home as she always did. But as she pulled into her garage and prepared to park, an unthinkable event unfolded. From the shadows, a man lunged forward. Before Nancy could process what was happening, the cold barrel of a gun was pressed against her head. A deafening shot rang out, and Nancy collapsed to the ground. The assailant swiftly grabbed her purse and fled the scene. The entire crime was executed with chilling speed and precision. Yet, the police quickly identified a suspect, a man named Dustin Harams. At first, everyone assumed this was a random armed robbery gone wrong. But the truth lurking beneath the surface was far more shocking than investigators could have imagined. As they dug deeper, authorities uncovered a web of connections involving no fewer than 20 individuals. So, the questions arise. Who is Nancy? Why were so many people determined to see her dead? And how did she manage to survive a labyrinth of assassination plots? In 1983, at a church in Texas, USA, 24-year-old Nancy tied the knot with Frank Howard. Over the next 30 years, they built a life together. Frank, a successful accountant who owned his own company, earned a substantial income. Nancy, choosing to be a full-time homemaker, devoted herself to managing the household and raising their children with unwavering care. To outsiders, they were the picture of an enviable, happy family. Even close friends and relatives often remarked that Nancy and Frank shared an exceptionally harmonious relationship, rarely exchanging harsh words over their decades together. But no one could have predicted that a seemingly routine business trip would set off a catastrophic chain of events threatening to shatter their idyllic home. On July 25, 2009, during a work trip to California, Frank met a woman named Susanna Leant. Some might jump to conclusions. Frank must have been captivated by Susanna's youthful beauty. That's partially true, but only half the story. Indeed, Frank fell for Susanna at first sight. However, she wasn't the young, glamorous woman one might imagine. Susanna was a middle-aged woman. In her 50s, divorced and raising 2 children alone on a tight budget. This just goes to show love doesn't always need a reason. So, how deeply did Frank fall for Susanna? The answer might be hard to believe. Within just 6 months, Frank paid over $100,000 to cover college tuition for Susanna's daughter and treated her entire family to the Super Bowl, one of America's priciest sporting events. When Susanna expressed her love for outdoor adventures, Frank didn't hesitate to spend $30,000 on a small yacht to indulge her passion, her aging, dilapidated house. Frank shelled out $900,000 to buy her a luxurious mansion for private rendezvous. He purchased an additional $380,000 apartment. Lavish gifts, candlelit dinners, upscale restaurants, and private jet trips became routine in their relationship. When Frank ran out of ideas for gifts, he simply handed Susanna 2 checks, one for $500,000 and another for $200,000. His generosity was nothing short of staggering. At this point, you might wonder, with Frank so blatantly carrying on an affair, how could Nancy not have noticed? The answer isn't straightforward. For years, Nancy had poured her heart and soul into her family, embodying the role of a devoted wife and exemplary mother. But no matter how carefully Frank tried to conceal his actions, subtle changes in his behavior couldn't escape the keen instincts of a perceptive woman like Nancy. For instance, during this period, Frank almost never answered her calls. On the rare occasions he returned home, he insisted on sleeping in a separate room. The breaking point came when Frank casually hinted at divorce, half joking. When Nancy firmly replied that she'd rather meet the devil himself than agreed to a divorce, Frank grew visibly irritated, accusing her of not knowing how to take a joke. This suggests Nancy likely sensed something was amiss. But without concrete evidence, she chose to trust her husband unconditionally, quietly nurturing and preserving their family. As both a wife and a mother, Nancy was truly beyond reproach. In such circumstances, divorce would have been an arduous path for Frank. Even if he pushed for a separation, the financial cost would have been astronomical. After days of wrestling with his emotions and weighing his interests, Frank hatched a sinister plan. Hire someone to eliminate his wife. In 2010, Frank reached out to a man named Billy Hall. Before delving further, let's take a moment to examine this man's background. To put it bluntly, Billy was a 51-year-old drifter with no job or family, living off his girlfriend, her mother, and their 4 children in a cramped house. So why would Frank turn to someone like Billy for an assassination plot? Because Billy's past was a long rap sheet of misdeeds, brawling, drag racing, alcoholism, and disturbing the peace. If it was trouble, Billy had done it. Over his 50 years, he'd spent 14 years behind bars and had earned a reputation as a local underworld figure. When Frank first proposed taking a life, Billy's initial reaction was to shout, "Are you out of your mind?" But the moment Frank mentioned a $60,000 upfront payment for the job, Billy's tune changed. Beaming, he exclaimed, "Brother, I'm exactly the guy you're looking for." According to Billy, their first meeting took place outside a local store. When he arrived, a gray Lexus was waiting. As soon as Billy slid into the passenger seat, Frank handed him an envelope stuffed with $60,000 in cash along with a photo of Nancy. Frank assured him this was merely a deposit. If the job was completed, Billy would receive hundreds of thousands more. Never in his life had Billy seen so much money. Without hesitation, he bowed his head, eagerly promising to carry out the hit flawlessly, leaving no trace of evidence. However, with a hefty sum now in his hands, Billy didn't immediately spring into action. Instead, he made a beeline for the nearest bar to celebrate its style. This wasn't entirely surprising. After all, he was gearing up for a heinous act, so indulging in a preemptive treat seemed understandable. The problem was that Billy's vices extended far beyond alcohol. He was heavily addicted to drugs. So, the second thing he did with the money was purchase a large stash of narcotics and invite his fellow addicts for an all-night binge. It goes without saying that such loud, erratic behavior quickly caught the attention of the police. The result, Billy was arrested for illegal possession of a substantial quantity of drugs. The remaining $60,000 he hadn't yet squandered was confiscated by authorities who deemed it illicit due to its untraceable origins. Frank's initial deposit was as good as gone. There's an old saying, it's easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but nearly impossible to return to frugality from extravagance. After his release from jail, Billy found himself disoriented and restless. Having tasted the thrill of wealth, returning to his penniless, aimless existence was unbearable. After some deliberation, he decided to contact Frank again, hoping to wheedle another advance for personal expenses. To his credit, Frank proved to be a remarkably generous employer. Understanding that hiring a hitman was no simple task, he promptly wired Billy an additional $35,000 as operational funds. A reasonable person might assume Billy would learn from his mistakes and proceed with caution this time, but old habits die hard. Billy repeated the same reckless cycle. He took the money, bought drugs, gathered his cronies, and predictably was arrested again. In less than 2 months since Frank first approached him, Billy had landed behind bars twice for the same offense. It was clear to anyone paying attention, this man was utterly unreliable. The trouble was finding a competent hitman wasn't exactly straightforward. To make matters worse, time was running out for Frank. Why the urgency? Because Susanna was growing tired of being the other woman. She had agreed to a relationship with a married man like Frank. Based on his assurances that his marriage to Nancy was irreparably broken and that divorce proceedings were underway. Believing his promises, Susanna had spent years hoping to soon step into a legitimate marriage with Frank. With the situation escalating, Frank had no time to scout for a new hitman. Gritting his teeth, he funneled another $80,000 to Billy, pressing him to act swiftly. To sweeten the deal, Frank added an incentive. After eliminating Nancy, Billy could pocket the $40,000 worth of jewelry in the house and set the place ablaze to erase all evidence. Ever the considerate client, Frank even cautioned Billy to ensure the fire didn't spread to neighboring homes. It's fair to say that as a mastermind, Frank was exceptionally thorough and accommodating. Unfortunately, he grossly underestimated Billy's shamelessness and incompetence. Within a month, Billy had burned through the entire $80,000, and Nancy remained unscathed. At this point, not only was Frank growing impatient, but even Billy himself felt a twinge of embarrassment. Still, life without money was unbearable, and showing up empty-handed to beg for more funds was unlikely to work again. So, Billy switched tactics. He enlisted his close friend, Richard, presenting him as a trusted accomplice. And together they met with Frank to stage a performance of serious preparation. Naturally, one accomplice wasn't enough. Billy also drafted a detailed assassination plan outlining every step: how to carry out the hit, how to escape, and how to deflect blame from their employer if caught. Frank was impressed and promptly handed over tens of thousands more. Before parting ways, he issued a decisive order. Do it now. By now, you're probably wondering, did Billy finally take action? The answer is yes, but it was as good as nothing. Over the next 6 months, Billy attempted to eliminate Nancy at least 5 times. Each effort collapsing at the last moment for the most absurd reasons. One time, his girlfriend forgot to bring essential items, derailing the group's plans. Another time, Billy got so drunk the night before that he could barely open his eyes the next morning. There was even an instance where he was arrested for an unrelated offense, forcing him to pay bail to secure his release. Through these antics, Billy continually stalled while Frank kept dipping into his wallet, hemorrhaging hundreds of thousands more with no results in sight. Worse still, Billy decided that profiting alone wasn't enough. He wanted to rope in his friends and family to cash in as well. He told Frank that upon reflection, he realized a single person couldn't handle a murder. It required a coordinated team, so he demanded payment for his girlfriend Stacy and his buddy Richard. However, Stacy insisted on receiving her share via bank transfer rather than cash. The catch? She didn't have a bank account, so the money had to be wired to her mother's and daughter's accounts. To ensure everyone's silence, Billy suggested Frank add a 20% hush fee to each transfer. Thus, Billy's so-called assassination team ballooned into a sprawling network of over a dozen people. Richard, Stacy, distant cousins, neighbors, and sworn brothers, all dragged in as pretexts for more money. By 2012, the total sum Frank had paid to Billy and his cohorts was nearing a staggering $3 million. At this point, even someone as gullible as Frank couldn't ignore that he'd been thoroughly conned. But the problem was he was in too deep to back out. Billy, fully aware of this, shifted tactics. He stopped merely asking for money and began outright extorting Frank. He threatened to spill the entire murder-for-hire scheme to the police if Frank dared to stop the payments. Cornered. Frank had no choice but to keep forking over cash, helplessly watching an entire network thrive off his criminal secret. It wasn't until May 2012 that a glimmer of progress appeared. That day, Frank met Billy as usual. In previous meetings, Billy had come alone or with Richard and Stacy, no one else. But this time, a new face joined them. A young man named Dustin, Stacy's son. Frank quickly saw an opportunity. While Billy and Stacy were distracted, he discreetly obtained Dustin's contact information. Already formulating a plan to switch operatives, Frank figured that the son of two deadbeats like Billy and Stacy was unlikely to be a saint. But that was precisely the point. At just 18, Dustin was likely bold, reckless, and unjaded by years of scheming. With enough money, he'd probably do anything, and the offer Frank made was impossible to refuse. If Dustin completed the job, he'd receive a $100,000 bonus upfront, followed by a fixed monthly stipend of $5,000 for life. In other words, Frank promised to bankroll him forever. As expected, Dustin agreed instantly without a moment's hesitation. But Frank's clandestine maneuver didn't stay secret for long. Billy and Stacy soon caught wind of his attempt to poach their son. They planned to sabotage the deal. But before they could act, both were arrested again for drug-related charges. This was hardly surprising. Billy had been in and out of jail countless times, always bailed out by Frank to keep him on task. This time, however, was different. With a new hitman in Dustin, Frank had no reason to waste another dime on the useless duo. Despite Billy and Stacy's desperate pleas, incessant calls, and promises to act immediately if released, Frank was resolute. "We're done. From now on, I only work with Dustin." True to form, Frank's declaration of cutting ties enraged Billy. Without hesitation, he approached a prison guard and spilled the entire story of Frank hiring him to kill Nancy. But things didn't unfold as he'd hoped. The police didn't just dismiss his claims. They treated Billy like a delusional addict spinning wild tales. After all, who would believe a drugged adult con man like Billy could swindle someone out of $3 million? It sounded like a bad joke. Meanwhile, though Frank had successfully ditched Billy and secured a new hitman in Dustin, he was blissfully unaware that he'd stumbled into yet another trap. Because Dustin, it turned out, was genuinely intellectually disabled. Forget carrying out a murder, he couldn't even handle basic tasks like refilling a car's coolant. But Frank, oblivious to this, believed he'd finally found his ace in the hole. On July 4, 2012, America's Independence Day, Frank met with Dustin to seal the deal. Amid the festive atmosphere, coupled with a $24,000 advance, Dustin was over the moon. So elated, in fact, that he immediately rushed to buy drugs, danced the night away at a bar, and handed out drinks and drugs like a high roller. To top it off, he posted a selfie on Facebook, clutching a wad of cash with a day's distorted grin. In a final burst of euphoria while driving home, Dustin tossed thousands of dollars out his car window, scattering bills like confetti for good luck. Predictably, such reckless antics didn't go unnoticed. A mutual acquaintance, Jason Lending, witnessed this sudden extravagance and confronted Dustin about the source of his windfall. Without a hint of discretion, Dustin spilled the entire story of the murder-for-hire scheme. Even bragging that it was easy money, just one job for a lifetime of luxury. Jason, far from alarmed, felt a pang of envy. Why didn't I stumble into a deal like this? Seizing the moment, he devised a bold plan. While Dustin was distracted, Jason secretly copied Frank's phone number. Back home, he and his wife Stephanie hatched a scheme to extort Frank. Their plan was straightforward. Jason called Frank, claiming he knew all about the plot. If Frank wanted to avoid trouble, he'd better pay to talk. Truth be told, Jason wasn't expecting much. He didn't even know Frank's real name. How could he report him? The call was a gamble. If it paid off, great. If not, no loss. To his surprise, Frank was remarkably cooperative. Without much probing, he agreed to pay $35,000 to keep Jason quiet. You might assume Jason would pull a Billy, milking Frank for more. But Jason was different. As a seasoned hustler, he valued credibility. Seeing Frank's prompt payment, Jason kept his word, vowing never to contact him again. And to bury the secret forever. But life is full of twists. Just when Jason thought his cameo was over, Frank reached out to him. Why? Because Frank saw Jason as the most principled person he'd encountered in his chaotic quest to hire a hitman. The others were addicts, lunatics, or greedy leeches. But Jason took the money and vanished without a fuss. So Frank made an offer. Would Jason act as a broker for the assassination of Nancy, his still living wife? But hadn't Frank just hired Dustin? True, but Dustin proved hopelessly incompetent. Unable to grasp the plan or even remember the route to Frank's house, Frank sighed in frustration. He had no choice but to find someone new. This time, he dangled a tantalizing deal. If Jason found a killer, he'd earn a $50,000 broker's fee upon success, while the hitman would pocket $100,000. Jason was floored. His only thought, do I look like someone who does this kind of ruthless work? But with $150,000 staring him in the face, refusing seemed foolish. So despite his nerves, Jason agreed. Unlike Billy, Jason had no reliable crew to recruit. So he turned to his wife Stephanie to pose as the assassin. With a dye job and a masculine disguise, Stephanie was ready to play the part. The couple conned Frank again, pocketing another $10,000 before cutting contact and vanishing from his life as if they'd never existed. When police later heard this story, they were incredulous, joking. Do you really think Frank was this gullible? Jason and Stephanie replied in unison, yes, he was that gullible. After 3 years of dead ends, on August 18, 2012, the task of killing Nancy fell back to Dustin, the dimwit Frank deemed the least deceitful. Through countless betrayals, Frank learned a bitter truth. The hitmen he'd hired were nothing like the polished killers in movies. They were either too stupid or too cunning, focused solely on fleecing him without any intent to follow through. So, he entrusted the job to Dustin, figuring his lack of guile made him obedient. And thus, the opening scene of the crime unfolded. Technically, Dustin followed instructions. The bullet struck Nye's temple, piercing her nose, throat, and lung. But one critical detail changed everything. In his panic, Dustin grabbed Nye's purse and fled. He didn't realize Nancy wasn't dead. Despite her grievous injuries, she crawled into the house and dialed 911. When police and paramedics arrived, Nancy was still conscious and was ultimately saved. Thanks to Nye's precise description of her attacker, police swiftly apprehended Dustin. His feeble mind couldn't hold a secret for long, and Frank's 3-year scheme unraveled completely. At the time of the attack, Frank was on a business trip out of town. When police called to inform him of Nye's assault, he sobbed dramatically and rushed home, playing the part of a devoted husband. But the first thing police did upon meeting him was seize his phone. Text messages, call logs, and a 3-year trail of infidelity and conspiracy were laid bare. Combined with Dustin's confession, every player in the plot to kill Nancy, including Billy, was summoned and interrogated. By now, Frank had nothing left to hide. His secrets were exposed, and he faced the full weight of the law. The story seems to reach its end, but does anything feel off? There's a nagging sense that something throughout this tale doesn't quite add up, though it's hard to pinpoint. Consider this. Was Frank intelligent? Clearly not if Billy swindled him out of millions. Yet, how could someone so foolish amass such wealth? As mentioned earlier, Frank was the head of an accounting firm. Could a man in that position truly be so naive? So, why did Frank spend so recklessly? Two possibilities emerge. First, his family was so wealthy that a few million or even tens of millions was pocket change. But Frank wasn't from an elite dynasty. That leaves the second possibility. The money he spent wasn't his. When this case broke, it captivated the media, and investigators dug deep into its financial underpinnings. They discovered that Frank's lavish spending came entirely from a client named Richard Riley. Who is Richard? A military contractor supplying the U.S. Army in Iraq, working for the Department of Defense. Richard hired Frank to legally transfer vast sums from the Middle East to the U.S. To facilitate this, he provided Frank with multiple offices and a private jet. But a review of the books revealed Frank had embezzled over $30 million from Richard over the years. Suddenly, it became clear. Whether bankrolling his mistress or plotting his wife's murder, Frank never spent a dime of his own money. While Billy and his ilk schemed to con a few million, Frank effortlessly siphoned tens of millions without breaking a sweat. In August 2014, Frank Howard's trial for orchestrating his wife's attempted murder began. With overwhelming evidence and numerous witnesses, he was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison. Yet, the most astonishing moment came from the victim herself. Despite her severe injuries and the loss of one eye, Nancy told reporters, "I've never hated Frank. He's the father of my children. And that love will always remain. If he were released, I'd forgive him because I refuse to live in resentment." Hearing these words, Frank, clad in prison garb, wept silently, unable to speak. A tragic assassination plot ended on a hauntingly human note. The con man who stole $3 million trembled in the witness stand. The mastermind who embezzled $30 million sobbed in his cell. And the wife who lost an eye declared, "I choose forgiveness." As we mock the incompetence of hired killers and marvel at the greed of a word husband, this case forces us to confront a painful truth about marriage. Bonds forged by rings and riches often pale beside a heartfelt apology. The eye Nancy lost became her third eye, piercing the illusions of this world. When marriage becomes a game of wealth, love is always the first casualty. Story 5. Right. We're told. I know what's going to happen to you now, mate. Well, I know what's going to happen. We're just going to go to prison, obviously, again. Why? What have you done? Have you done something to anyone else? Yeah. What have you done? Murdered 4 people. This is the exact moment the small town of Keelamarsh in the UK would witness its first murder. One so brutal it would lead to one of the harshest punishments ever handed down under British law. Have you stabbed yourself, mate? I can see blood on your hand. Yeah. Anywhere else? Just my chest. 4 inches in with a bread knife. Can we have a look? Yeah. And one on the stomach. I bled quite a lot. All right. Do you want to? Can we go down there? No. 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 Just stay there. Stay there. Meet Damon Bendel, a violent man with a chilling past and a rap sheet that stretched back over a decade. By the time this body cam footage was recorded, he wasn't just a familiar name to law enforcement. He was a walking red flag, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared anyone for the horrors he was about to unleash. On what would become his last day as a free man, Bendel committed a crime so twisted, so deeply disturbing that he cemented his name in infamy as one of the most loathed criminals in the UK. What makes this case even more haunting isn't just the sheer brutality of what he did, but the many warning signs that were ignored along the way. How did a man with such a violent past slip through the cracks again and again? How did the system fail to protect the innocent? And who paid the ultimate price? In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on the monstrous life of Damien Bendel, the innocent lives he shattered, and the chilling path that led to that tragic day. We've covered countless disturbing cases, but this one, it's on another level. And trust me, once you hear the full story, you'll understand why. For this story, we need to take a trip to the peaceful town of Keelamarsh, a small, close-knit community in Derbyshire, England. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where kids ride bikes until the sun sets, and where the biggest news might be about a new shop opening or the local football team winning a match. But on one quiet Sunday morning in September of 2021, that peaceful image shattered in a way no one could have ever imagined. It was the 19th of September, a Sunday like any other until exactly 7:26 in the morning, when emergency services received a chilling phone call. On the line was a man named Damon Bendel. His voice wasn't panicked. It wasn't shaky. In fact, it was eerily calm, as if he were reporting a broken window or a car crash. He said, "Now, Keelamar isn't a big place." Within just 14 minutes of that call, police officers were already pulling up to the house, and there he was, Damon Bendel himself, standing in front of the property. He looked messy, dazed, dressed in a trench coat, and had visible blood on his hands and chest. Yet again, he didn't act like a man who had just committed an unspeakable crime. He was calm, cooperative, disturbingly so. I can see blood on your hands. Yeah. Anywhere else? Just my chest 4 inches. In with a bread knife. Can we have a look? Yeah. And one on the stomach. I've had quite a look. Right. Do you want can we go down and see? No. 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 Just stay there. Stay there. I just don't want to be in front of everyone. Right. Just around the corner. I'll just walk in with you in a minute. Right. Stand here. Stand here. Stand here. See you. Right. We're told. I know what's going to happen to you now, mate. Well, I know what's going to happen to me. We're just going to go to prison. Obviously again. Well, have you done something to anyone else? Yeah, well, we don't murder poor people. As officers led him away from public view, giving him a strange courtesy of privacy despite the gravity of his crime, they prepared themselves to enter the house, and what they found inside would haunt them forever. The scene was nothing short of a nightmare. 35-year-old Terry Harris, Damon's partner, was found lifeless in the living room. Nearby in the bathroom was her 13-year-old son, John Paul Bennett. In one of the bedrooms, 2 more young lives were lost. 11-year-old Lacey Bennett and her best friend Connie Gent, who had been staying over for a sleepover. All 4 were brutally murdered. The girls were so young, so full of life, just starting their journey in the world. And it was all taken away in one horrifying night. Damien, it's 0747 hours. I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defense. Do not mention when questioned. Some feel they are lying in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Your arrest is necessary to protect you from harm, to prevent your disappearance, for a prompt and effective investigation. Okay, we're going to get you out, but we're going to put you in the back of the van. After Damien Bendel was arrested, officers entered the house and were met with a scene straight out of a nightmare. Blood wasn't confined to one area. It was everywhere, smeared across walls, soaked into the floors, and heavy in the air. It was instantly clear that whatever happened inside wasn't fast or quiet. It was brutal and frenzy. A claw hammer was found nearby, believed to be the main weapon used. And in the kitchen, a bloodied bread knife added to the horror. This incident didn't just shake the quiet little town of Killamar, it shattered it. I mean, this was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked. Kids played freely in the streets and everyone kind of knew everyone. Violent crime, practically unheard of. In fact, before this, there hadn't been a single murder recorded in the town's history. So, when news broke that 4 lives had been taken in one night, it felt like the entire community had been hit by a freight train. No one could believe it. How could something this horrifying happen in their backyard? But as the details unfolded, the heartbreak deepened. This wasn't just a simple, tragic case. It was messy, twisted, and far more disturbing than anyone was prepared for. And what made it even harder to process. The household wasn't a typical family setup. None of the children were actually related to Damien Bendel, the man at the center of it all. His relationship with Terry Harris, the mother of two of the children, had only started a few months earlier. It was still new, still developing. And Connie Gent, one of the victims, wasn't even part of the family. She was just staying the night with her best friend, Lacey. A simple, innocent sleepover turned into something absolutely unimaginable. You see, this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was premeditated, calculated, and as you'll soon find out, rooted in a long list of red flags that were somehow ignored or brushed off. And the worst part, what Damien did went far beyond murder. As horrific as that is already, he crossed lines that most of us can't even comprehend. It was later revealed that Damien had taken advantage of 11-year-old Lacey while she was dying. And if that wasn't horrifying enough, he returned after she had passed. It's hard to even find the words to describe something that cruel. This wasn't just a murder case. It was one of the most disturbing and inhumane crimes Britain had seen in recent years. But before we dig deeper into Damien's twisted mind and the system failures that allowed this to happen, let's take a moment to understand the people whose lives were taken. Because they deserve to be remembered, not just as victims, but as real people with stories, dreams, and love in their lives. Terry Harris was born in London to Angela Smith and Lawrence Harris. She grew up in the busy East End, a city girl through and through. But everything changed when she turned 17. That's when she moved to Sheffield with her mom while her dad relocated to Essex. With two homes almost 200 miles apart, Terry learned to juggle life between them. Somewhere along the way, she met a man named Jason Bennett. And the two built a life together. They weren't just any couple. They were together for over 15 years. And during that time, they had two amazing kids, John Paul and Lacey. Lacey was your typical fun-loving girl. She loved performing, dancing, and making silly TikToks with her friends. She was always full of energy, always smiling. Her older brother, John Paul, was more mellow and quiet, but had a huge heart. He loved his family deeply and was the kind of kid who made you feel calm just being around him. Both children went to Outwood Academy City School, and both were well liked and doing great academically. Terry was the kind of mom every kid dreams of having. She gave everything for her children. Whether it was school, dance class, or just cuddles on the couch, she was there. And it wasn't just because she was their mom. Terry worked as a care worker. So, compassion, patience, and empathy were just built into who she was. It came naturally to her. Now, Jason, the kid's dad, was a good man, too. Even after he and Terry split up after 15 years together, he stayed actively involved in their lives. He talked to his kids every single day. The divorce wasn't easy, of course, but they did their best to make it work for the sake of their children. Terry, like many single moms, had a lot on her plate. She adored her kids, but she also craved adult companionship. Someone to care for her the way she cared for everyone else. So, in the year 2020, she decided to give dating apps a try. Harmless, right? Just a modern way of meeting someone. That's when she crossed paths with Damien Bendel. Now, looking back, it's easy to ask why him. But at the time, Terry had no reason to suspect the danger that Damon carried. He probably seemed quiet, maybe even charming at times. That's the thing about people like him. They don't show you the darkness right away. They wait until they've been let in. And after a string of conversations and getting to know each other online, the two eventually fell into a relationship. At the time, Terry was living in Woodhouse, a suburb in Sheffield, trying to rebuild her life and provide stability for her children after the end of her long-term relationship. But by early 2021, that would change. Terry packed up and moved to Chandos Crescent in Keelamarsh, a peaceful little village that up until then had never known violence. She moved there with her children, John, Paul, and Lacey, and also brought Damien with them. At first glance, it might have looked like a fresh start, a new home, a new chapter. But beneath that surface was something dark and dangerous. So, who exactly was Damien Bendel? Born in the year 1989, Damien came from Swindon. From early on, it seemed like he was set on a path of destruction, and no one around him, not teachers, not neighbors, not even friends, could quite figure out why. While most kids were busy figuring out school or hobbies, Damien seemed obsessed with crafting this tough guy image. He wanted to be feared. He was determined to build a reputation as a hard man in the area. But truthfully, most of it was just smoke and mirrors, a performance, a persona he wore like a mask. Behind all the bravado, there was nothing genuinely impressive. Just insecurity, violence, and a whole lot of disturbing behavior. From a young age, Damien had already found himself involved in petty crimes, shoplifting, theft, and random acts of vandalism. And once that door opened, things escalated quickly. Those who knew him growing up often said his number one goal wasn't to succeed in life or even to survive. It was simply to be seen as dangerous. He even tried his hand at cage fighting, which based on multiple reports, didn't go well for him. He failed more often than he succeeded. Yet, he still clung to this aggressive persona. He had True Blue tattooed across his knuckles, Chelsea Football Club's famous slogan. But ironically, despite being such a supposed superfan, he had never once seen a Chelsea match live. It was all for show. Even more disturbing, he reportedly had not serrated tattoos inked on his legs. But if you asked him anything about the ideology or history behind them, he couldn't tell you a single fact. There was no real belief behind the symbols. It was just part of the performance, a costume for the bad boy role he so desperately wanted to play. According to several people who knew him in Swindon, Damon had also bragged about killing his friend's dog, saying that when she couldn't afford to have it put down, he offered to do it himself with a brick. Now, let's hope to God that was just one of his lies. But multiple people around him say it actually happened. That's where things take a chilling turn. Because torturing or killing animals, that's not just cruelty. It's a well-documented early warning sign of future violence, especially in cases of extreme criminal behavior. And he didn't stop there. It's been said that he also got pleasure from torturing kittens. Again, these aren't rumors whispered in passing. These are things that came up again and again when people looked into his past. And if you think that sounds like the behavior of a deeply unstable individual, well, you'd be absolutely right. Damien even claimed to have multiple personalities, though this was never professionally diagnosed. He told people he could snap at any moment. He had this twisted little rule. He'd give people 3 warnings an hour, and if they crossed him a third time, then all bets were off. No one was safe. That kind of volatility made him dangerous, unpredictable, and incapable of normal relationships. Of course, someone living with that level of chaos was bound to struggle with substance abuse, too. Damien had long-standing problems with alcohol and drugs, and he never seemed to care about getting help. His habits controlled him, and because of that, he was always either in trouble or teetering on the edge of it. Over the years, his criminal record stacked up like a rap sheet out of a movie. We're talking about attempted robbery, armed robbery, assault, possession of a weapon, and grievous bodily harm. One incident in 2015 really shows the kind of man he was. He tried to rob a local convenience store with a knife. But when the elderly shopkeeper grabbed a golf club and came at him, Damon ran away. So much for being the tough guy, right? He was a coward, plain and simple. Now, here's the part that's both frustrating and heartbreaking. Terry had no idea about any of this. When she met Damon online, he didn't come off as a dangerous criminal or a violent abuser. He came off like many people do on the internet, normal, maybe even charming. And that's the terrifying truth about dating apps. While they can help connect people, they also make it dangerously easy for someone to hide who they really are. Behind a profile picture and a few carefully crafted messages, anyone can look like a great catch. The internet is full of liars, manipulators, and worse. And it's so easy to fall for someone's act when all you're seeing is the version they want you to see. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for him to work his way into Terry's life. It had only been a few months into their relationship when Terry's friends started to notice something wasn't right. Whispers about Damien's past started to circulate. Rumors of violent outbursts, past charges, and even criminal convictions. These stories weren't just petty gossip, either. They were red flags, warning signs that something dark was sitting just below the surface. Terry's own mother, Angela, was deeply worried. She didn't like the way Damon seemed to take over so quickly. She could sense that something about him was off. And like any loving mother, she begged her daughter to reconsider the relationship. She warned her repeatedly, sometimes gently, other times more urgently, that Damien might not be safe, especially around the kids. And sadly, that mother's intuition turned out to be heartbreakingly accurate. But Terry, being the gentle and compassionate woman that she was, believed in second chances. She believed that people could change. She saw Damien's flaws, sure, but she also saw what she thought was potential. Maybe he just needed a stable home, a bit of love, a supportive environment. Maybe he'd rise to the occasion. So, in September of 2020, only 5 months after meeting him online, Terry made the life-altering decision to move Damien into her home in Marsh. It's worth mentioning here, Swindon, where Damien was from, is nearly 200 miles away from Marsh. That's a massive relocation. And for someone you only just met on Tinder, it's the kind of decision that looking back feels riddled with red flags. But Terry wasn't foolish. She was hopeful. She had just found out she was pregnant. And in that moment, it probably felt like a reason to believe. Maybe this child would give Damon a reason to become responsible. Maybe the baby would bring out a softer, more nurturing side of him. That's what she hoped for. But Damon hadn't changed. Not even close. His issues ran deep, far beyond what Terry could ever fix with love and kindness. Even during his time in prison, he had been a mess. Cellmates would later describe him as being constantly high, barely functioning, and completely lost to the haze of synthetic drugs like spice. For those who don't know, spice is a synthetic cannabinoid that's cheap, accessible, and extremely dangerous. It's wreaking havoc across the UK, particularly in prisons. And Damien, he was one of its most chaotic consumers. So when Damien moved into Terry's home in Keelamarsh, he didn't come with a clean slate. He came under heavy supervision. At the time, he was already on probation for arson-related offenses. He was supposed to be reporting to an officer weekly. On top of that, he was required to wear an electronic ankle monitor and follow a strict curfew, meaning he couldn't leave the house without permission. But what's truly chilling is the fact that he was allowed to be bailed into a home that had two young children living inside. Neither John Paul nor Lacey were related to him. Yet, no one from the probation office seemed to raise an eyebrow. No one asked if this was a safe idea. No one intervened. And honestly, how this wasn't flagged remains one of the most disturbing oversights in this entire tragedy. The arson conviction: he was on probation for just another moment of reckless behavior while under the influence of hard drugs. Over the years, Damon had become heavily dependent on a cocktail of substances. He told people he was clean. He told Terry he was turning things around. But that, like most things with him, was a lie. And tragically, his drug use would become impossible to hide on one horrifying day, Saturday the 18th of September, 2021. That weekend, the Harris Pendel household was buzzing with activity. The whole family was home and Lacey had invited her close friend Connie Gent over for a sleepover. The two young girls had big plans. They were raising money for cancer awareness, a cause close to their hearts. So, they spent the day baking cakes and sweets, excited to sell them at the park. It was the kind of wholesome, innocent activity that makes you believe in the goodness of the world. And that day, someone snapped a photo of the girl smiling brightly, full of hope and joy. What no one knew then, what no one could have known, was that it would be the last photo ever taken of them alive. Just hours after that final photo was taken, everything would shatter. The two young girls, Lacey and Connie, would be dead alongside Terry and her son, John Paul. And the reason behind this horrific tragedy is all because of Damon Bendel. What happened next is almost too brutal to imagine. After running through his stockpile of weed and alcohol, Damon began consuming cocaine, 3 to 4 bags of it, throughout the day. The drug use escalated, pushing him into a dangerous blackout state. When he realized he had run out, he desperately tried calling his dealer, making several attempts with no luck. That's when he snapped. In that moment, all sense of reason and humanity vanished. Phone data later revealed that everything that followed happened within a horrifying span of just 18 minutes. Fueled by rage and drugs, Damon picked up a claw hammer. His first target was Terry. He attacked her in the living room, killing her and the unborn child she was carrying. Then he marched upstairs and found John Paul in the bathroom. He murdered him, too. Next, Damon turned his fury on Connie Gent, Lacey's friend, before finally abusing and killing Lacey herself. And the details only get more disturbing. Autopsy reports later confirmed that Lacey had been abused multiple times throughout the night. Damon had even positioned a mirror in the room so he could watch himself carry out the abuse. By 6 o'clock the next morning, Damon casually grabbed John Paul's Xbox and walked out of the house, intending to sell it to buy more drugs. Phone records show he continued trying to contact his dealer. He even booked a cab. And when the driver asked how his night had been, he calmly replied, "Not too bad. A bit mad." Surveillance cameras caught him walking through Sheffield, Xbox in hand. After that, he returned home, called his mother while stopping at a convenience store, and was caught on CCTV buying cigarettes, blood still visible on his hands. Back at the house, he made a weak attempt to take his own life using a bread knife, then called emergency services. Over the phone, he chillingly confessed, "The whole house is covered in claret. I used a hammer. Obviously, I'm going to prison because I murdered 4 people. I bet. You don't get 4 murders in Kilmarsh, do you?" Officers rushed to the scene. And if you thought things couldn't get darker, when Damien was taken into custody, he openly admitted to the murders and even smirked while asking if killing Terry's unborn baby meant he technically murdered 5 people instead of 4. Just 6 days later, on September the 24th, 2021, Damon appeared at Derby Crown Court. After 15 months of investigation and court proceedings, on December the 21st, 2022, he was found guilty on 4 counts of murder and 1 count of sexual assault. He was sentenced to a whole lifetime in prison, meaning he will never under any circumstances be released. In the UK, whole life sentences are rare, reserved only for the most dangerous criminals. They're given when there's no hope for rehabilitation. And while that may sound like justice, the legal process uncovered something even more disturbing. An inquest into the case revealed that there were 51 separate failures made by the probation system. Failures that directly contributed to Damien being out of prison and allowed to live in Terry's home. He had once been accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a 16-year-old girl in foster care, but this wasn't properly recorded in his file. Even more alarming, when he openly threatened to kill his partner and her children if things went wrong, the officer monitoring his electronic tag failed to report it. If this threat had been documented, Damien would never have been allowed to stay in the same home. Another key error, his risk level was marked as medium instead of high. If he'd been assessed correctly, his previous suspended sentence for arson would have likely landed him behind bars, keeping him far from Terry and her family. The probation officers involved in the case later admitted they were overworked and understaffed. Some even confessed to only reviewing 2 out of the 10 available background reports on Damien. Because of these severe oversights, 1 officer was dismissed for gross misconduct. Although the real Victims were Terry, John, Paul, Lacey, and Connie. It's their families who now carry the unbearable weight of this loss. Terry's parents, Angela and Lawrence, were heartbroken and furious. When the findings of the inquest were made public, they released a powerful statement. The probation service failed to protect and keep our families safe. They are now gone. This must never happen again. For many years, they have been failing women and children at risk from violent men with a history of domestic abuse. The senior coroner overseeing the case didn't hold back either. In his remarks, he called out the probation service for trying to blame their failure on the COVID-19 pandemic. He stated that the pandemic does not explain the totality of the acts, omissions, or failures of the probation service. The service itself eventually admitted that they fell short on almost every level. They pledged to reform their broken system. And to help that happen, the government approved an additional £5 million in annual funding, but with strict conditions. The money must go toward improving infrastructure and training probation officers to a higher standard. But as we all know, for these 4 innocent victims, that promise came far too late. Jason Bennett, the father of Lacey, and John Paul, shared several heartbreaking videos on social media, showing how deeply he loved his children and how unbearable the pain of losing them has been. His grief was raw, honest, and unimaginable. It offered the world a glimpse into the shattered heart of a father who had lost everything in the most brutal way. No time's done. No. In the aftermath of the tragedy, neighbors placed a memorial plate on a tree outside the family home. It read, "Where angels sang and played, fly high, little ones." The house itself remained abandoned. No one wanted to live in a place marked by such sorrow and violence. Eventually, it was boarded up for good. Even the neighbors in the adjoining home asked to be relocated. The pain was too close, too. After everyone had moved out, Sheffield Council made the final decision to demolish the entire building. In its place now stands an extension of the park next door. A quiet green space, a peaceful resting place where once stood a house filled with unimaginable horror. As the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper, thank you for joining me here at Mr. Nightcared. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.